today I'm here talking with one of my friends, somebody that I respect above all else, particularly on the topic that we're going to be broaching today, which is sales and selling, and we're and I'll let Brian introduce himself in a second here as well, but this is really focused. If you're listening to this, if you're a owner of a business, if you are a sales manager of some component of sales revenue, or if you're an individual contributor, I'm a sales rep and I'm looking to sharpen my game. And why I brought Brian together is our backstory. It's just quickly is Brian and I met at a company over a little over a decade ago, and I hired Brian right out of DePaul University. Rep DePaul, right? And then and he came in and we started learning. It was my first sales management job, and we learned together. And Brian quickly became an amazing individual contributor, fast learner, top performer. After I departed there, I started here at Advisa as an individual contributor. So I'm from sales manager, individual contributor, and I still am. I'm in my 11th year at Advisa and have done okay. And Brian came on shortly after, kind of rose up the ranks. So I was Brian's manager. Brian came in, we were kind of peers. Brian became my manager for a healthy chunk of years. You know, now we're kind of like not my direct manager anymore, but he's still up there in the senior leadership team. So I thought he'd be a great person to come in, and thank you for making the trip up here, Brian, to talk about selling.
Love to see you. This is great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So like to kick off, we're in a weird time. Yeah. And I love to start off with the individual contributor stories, and we talk a lot about, you know, when a call went well, we sometimes call each other and hey, Brian, pick up, you got to hear this. And we're always talking about trying to improve, but I'd love to hear, and I'm sure if the folks listening, let's hear about one of your game changer stories, or one of those moments where you accomplished something you could have, or there was something that clicked in your learning and selling. Oh man,
there were a lot of them. One of the things that sticks out that has you in the story, which I think
I love those stories. Yeah. Those are great.
But the one that sticks out is, you know, early on, I had never sold anything. So it was a learning curve, and we were learning together. And the software that we were selling at the time, you know, you had to do a lot of education. So the people that we would get on the phone, they wouldn't know what they needed. They wouldn't even really know their problem. And so what I realized was the balance of talking and listening. And I'll never forget when you sat down with me and you had this printed out packet. I don't know if you remember this. It was like our check-in.
Oh yeah.
You came in with a check-in, and it was like this huge printed off packet. And I was like, oh gosh, what's this? And you laid it down. You're like, hey, I just want to show you something real quick. And you took a highlighter, and you go, I'm just going to circle every time that the prospect's talking versus when you're talking. So you started on page 1, you're like, you talking, and you circled it. It was like, then them talking, and it was like this tiny little paragraph. And it was like, you talking, and my paragraphs were always like multi-pages in length. And I just remember thinking, this is like 25 pages of me talking. And your coaching was like, yeah, if you can just flip that to some degree. He's like, you know, and of course, every conversation is going to be kind of back and forth, but that was a game changer for me. And it was because I could visually see my words on a page, and I saw the difference between when you ask someone a question and they talk, you're getting information, and you're able to use that information. So I think after that one-on-one check-in with you, that was a turning point for me, because I realized I'm good. I think I was good. I mean, my results showed that I was pretty good when I was talking, and I could talk someone into buying it. But that's how I viewed sales: talk someone into doing something. And I was like, it became the game changer for me was when I realized it was not about me talking someone into something. It was more about me listening to what they were saying that they needed, and then me fitting what I could bring to the table into that space.
Right.
And that was a big game changer.
I think my game changer is very similar, because how I'm wired, and Brian and I will talk about this later for those listening that are like, are they going to talk about PI? Yes. Yeah. We always will. Is very similar, where when I was coming up and selling, for me, it was about competition. It was about like winning. It was about getting a deal. And I came in so hard with my own agenda.
Yeah.
And I spun it on, when I was working with a customer, like, I am here to fix your problems. I am the solution to these problems, and I'm going to fix these problems to you.
Yeah.
And I went in, and what ended up happening was so many people were put off until I learned, and I can't remember if this was coaching I got, over the years or a while ago, but I got to a point where the awareness kicked where I'm like, I'm nobody. Yeah. These people don't care if if anyone shows, they don't care who walked in here. What they need is someone to actually listen to them, to prove, and not only listen, but prove to me that you heard and can synthesize what I said in my language. And I'd like to say it was like a momentary thing for me. It's like at that point forward, it wasn't. It was almost like being bludgeoned over and over again, where every time it was suboptimal, I wasn't invited back. I didn't win an RFP. I didn't get the deal. I could almost always go back 85+% of the time. It's like, BJ didn't listen.
Yeah.
I didn't listen. Whether it was talking too much or it was, all right, you can stop talking. I already know what your problem is.
Yeah.
Okay. I can already fix it.
Yep.
So I would go for that and I'd talk about that. But you know what it's like as well as I do when you're unpacking a situation where it's like, oh, you have an obviously clarified, perfectly clear problem that you have ready to talk to me about.
Right.
I mean, that's what, a fraction of the time someone calls and totally knows what to do. Because if they did,
they wouldn't call you.
What's the sheer odds they'd give anybody a call, let alone us? So I think that was my big one. It honestly points to another one where I'm always, you have you and you have the VP of sales you in your head when you're having a conversation. Like if I was observed, like, all right, you stop talking. Just like that Step Brothers. It's like, shut up.
Well, there was that call that you and I were on. It was probably like the 5th demo that I'd had with that. I don't know if you remember. I forget what the client was. I had 5 demos, and then finally I got the decision maker on the phone. And so I brought you because I was told by the people that I've been working with that, he's all about it, this VP of sales, but he just thinks that the price is way too expensive. And so I immediately went into this first call knowing that was the backdrop. And I never forget, we got on the phone call and we asked a couple questions. They started talking, and the people that I had already gotten bought into the solution were basically selling it to their boss. And we were just on the phone listening. And I remember you were across the room and I kept wanting to jump in like, yeah, but, and I kept doing that, like try to get my word in. Mm-hmm. And I just remember you being like, from across the room, like zip it, just let this unfold. And I think that they, as a team, it was basically like they were having an internal meeting, walking themselves into a purchasing decision. Mm-hmm. It was like all we had to do is kind of occasionally be like, yeah, what she said. Do you guys have any questions? Because that's exactly what we're going to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So that was
Well, it points
learning how to shut your mouth.
Yeah, and it points to and we're going to talk about the process Brian and I operate off of in a second, which you'll be familiar with in a moment. But it goes into, friction can be a very good thing. Mm-hmm. When someone's changing their mind, when they're giving up or really pushing against an existing belief that they have about how something should go, about how a process should go, doing something different and making a decision different than you did in the past. Think about your own life.
Yeah.
There's a little battle going on inside your head. It has nothing about who you're talking with. It's like, I'm about to say no to what I did before, which I thought was right when I did it, to something new, and to sit there and especially in enterprise level deals. I mean, these are people's careers. You're talking about reputations are out there. So you can't take it lightly when even the bigger it gets, the more meetings you might have to simply facilitate that unpacking of an evolution to something new. Like you're not throwing out, like, so you're doing everything wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And this is completely right. It's very rarely that case. It's moving them to the next thing. And when they talk, you got to hit them. I mean, fortunately there's a mute button. Don't say anything to do it because it feels good to know, oh my gosh, something broke open.
Yeah.
There's a state change in the meeting that happened, and I'm for me is the way I'm wired is I just want to be useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you see that happening, it's like the sheerest sign where I'm like, wow, a new conversation within an existing leadership team just started.
Yeah.
And some question I asked or something I said incited it. So.
Absolutely.
Well, let's turn the page real quick. I know if you want to research Advisa, advisausa.com is a great way to go and check out more of what we do. That's not what we're here for today, but we are going to talk about selling. And I think it's important to talk about, what's your methodology? How do you do it? We're going to share that with you real quick. And what I want you to think about too is if you're someone watch this, you've read the books. A new popular one is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's about CIA hostage negotiator. There's a ton of good stuff in there. Spin Selling, the Challenger Sale, stuff from Jeffrey Gitomer, the sales. I mean, there's so many solid sales books, processes, practices, groups that train it. But in what you're going to find in a second here is our process, which is customer focused selling, which you can see up there now. And we're just going to go real quick into like basically these are essentially the 5 stages of selling, and you're going to see them in some way, shape, or form anywhere you go.
Yeah.
So if you don't adopt this style, I think you're still going to get something out of the conversation today. But I feel it would be good to take a quick walk through what our journey looks like. So I don't know if Brian, if you want to kind of talk through this and what these stages are in brief.
Yeah. Well, first off, let me just say about sales methodologies or trainings is that what I've seen, my personal opinion on it, is that a rep who's in a call, who's having a good sales conversation, doesn't have any mind share to be thinking about the process, to be thinking about the training, right? So the training is there to hopefully make connections to what they're experiencing. So that's what I think good sales trainings, a rep should go, yeah, that's kind of what is happening. And then that way the awareness is already there. And then you can get into some of the useful skills to be more masterful at knowing where you are and moving it to the next place that you want to go. But, you know, you and I have both been in a lot of different sales trainings, and for me to have the wherewithal, the mental capacity to be in a meeting, be truly listening, which I think is the most important part of selling, and to know, I'm going to use that great question or that great skill that was taught to me in that sales training. I just don't think that's not reality.
Well, and you know me from right, like I own a gym called the Arsenal, and I'm always talking about reps.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be doing something for the first time when the lights are on.
Yeah.
When it's Friday night on a football field, when I got my first enterprise meeting.
Yeah.
Getting the meeting was one thing. Going there and actually being prepared to perform means I already know what to do in these different buckets and whatever they are in your sales process, which means I have to have the reps in practice.
Yeah.
And how many people, like when we go in, it's just so interesting. We go in, we have companies that call themselves, we're really performance oriented. We really want to perform. We're about top performing. They have all this nomenclature on the wall. But when you talk about a culture of practice and repetition, you don't really see, like, where do you train this and where do you do role? Oh yeah, no, we just get out there and crush it.
Right.
I'm like, so Tiger Woods just golfs all the time, right? LeBron James, he just goes and plays basketball when it gets on the plane, just shows up and play basketball. And I'm like, no coaches, right?
Yeah.
No, he doesn't have 19 coaches or anything, does he? He does? Yeah. He's the best. So they practice. So it's a good point. And it always seems like this is just my job. I mean, why should I practice that? I got to practice my golf game.
Yeah.
I got to practice this other thing that I'm interested in, like a hobby.
Yeah.
And we'll do it. But so many people won't take it seriously. And then they wonder, man, my results are suboptimal.
Yeah.
It's because you're trying to do things to people instead of walking through a meeting, instead of a meaningful process.
Well, yeah, this process is, I think about CFS as more of a framework, and it's cyclical in the graphic on purpose because it doesn't always go step by step. So that's the other difference. A lot of sales trainings, it's kind of like this linear process.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you. I very rarely have very linear sales conversations if they're going well. Mm-hmm. But really, it starts up there in the open, because if you don't have trust and credibility and you annoy a person as soon as you get them on the phone, game over. They're not going to give you the time of day. So open is just all about that, being able to understand who you're working with, kind of read the style and adjust to it so that they go, you know what? I think I can learn something from you. I think I can trust you that this conversation we're about to have will benefit me in one way or the other, whether I buy something or not. So that's the way I look at open. It also gives you the go ahead to start asking questions. So that open phase is also about, I'm going to respect your time, so that there's a turn signal that's like, we are not here to just chat and be buddies. Like, I'm going to ask you if it's cool if I ask you some questions, which leads into the next phase. Investigate other methodology, call it discovery. But this is where you're asking questions and you're getting into, why are we even on the phone? Why would you want to buy what we have? What's your problem? What's the challenge you're facing? And it's also about, it says up there, the buying factors. So there are also the reality that there are like more deal dynamics questions. And that's kind of going to get into some of the stuff about coaching. Some people are awesome at getting into the challenge and really understanding where a prospect's coming from. And then they're terrible at understanding the buying factors within the organization. Who signs the actual contract? How long does that process take?
Right.
And so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then you get into the presenting. And I think all too often, reps are just jumping to presenting before they've done either of those other two things.
Let me show you how awesome I am.
Yeah, let me tell you.
So good.
Let me talk to you about it. And so in our methodology, it's about applying judgment and articulating whatever it is that you can bring to the table, but applying the judgment to only talk about it as it relates to the things that they said they care about. Everything else is useless. And so it's articulating not assets or factors of whatever it is you're selling, software or services or whatever it is. It's about the value, and things are only valuable to other human beings based upon whatever it is they care about. Right. So that's the present phase. Confirm is gaining agreement. And I think the misperception of this is that it means getting like a signed contract. It's not. It's about gaining agreement to what we're going to do next. Like right now at Advisa, what's our average sales process? Like I think last time I dug into the numbers, it's like 75 days. Now, you and I have had one call deals. We've also had deals that took 3 years. But on average, you look at it, 75 days for us to sell our services is a pretty normal time span. So confirm is about gaining agreement to what are we going to agree to now that we've invested this time together
and something
moving forward.
And something I'd posit on confirm, which gets lost on as particularly individual reps is, do you understand next steps that you actually have control over?
Exactly.
Versus deal, no deal. Like these just binary things where I'm like, there's so much gray area to navigate. And I'm like, well, if you couldn't get that, like what's the next thing? Well, what's the next thing? The only answer that I don't like is, well, they said, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and one of my favorite coaching questions when we are coaching sales, so let me put my coach of sales vice presidents or sales coaches on, is to ask your sales rep, where do you think you are in this process? So that's number one. So that they just know, where are you? Like, are you here or are you way back here? Because a lot of times if they don't know, that's the problem. And the second thing around that confirm is, before a rep goes into a call, one of my coaching questions that I like to ask is, what do you hope the next advance is? Because if you think it's a deal and this is the first meeting, and on average our sales cycle takes 75 days, like, are you being realistic? Right. So the other day I was coaching one of our newer team members, and I asked her, I said, what is it that you hope comes out of this call? And she very quickly knew. She said, I want this to lead to this conversation with a broader number of people on their side. Perfect. So we shouldn't be talking about pricing and launching, and no, because that has nothing to do with the next agreement that you want to get, which is let's get access to this larger decision-making body. Yeah. And because she went into that meeting with that idea, guess what? She got it because she was realistic and she knew and she had a plan. And so that's a little bit, that to me is where confirm is important. And then position is really about relationship maintenance. And in different organizations, software as a service, for instance, has a very different setup than what you have at Advisa as a contributor, right? So at Advisa, when we work with clients, when BJ sells a new client, you have to maintain that relationship.
Correct.
And the vast majority of the new sales you bring in every year come from those established relationships. And there are lots of businesses out there like that. Software as a service is different, though. A lot of times it's toss it over the fence and client success is going to work with them from there on out, or they're going to execute what you sold them.
Right.
So it's just different, but that relationship's important even if you are tossing it over the fence, because that's a referral source. For any business.
And I think the other thing, position, where I'm exploring more with clients right now is, how are you treating your counterparts internally at your organization?
Yeah.
There's internal sales. Like, do people like you?
Yeah.
Like, do you make it easy for the people that help administer this account, from client success to whatever the stages are, even in like manufacturing, that like when things go to estimating and they go through these different channels that are separate from you, are you making them look good?
Yeah.
Or are you making this harder
Yeah.
And then does the client, whoever is starting out, do they see a consistent theme and language?
Yeah.
That the promises that you made, is the next person prepared to deliver those clearly or not? And I think there's two things going on. Did I clearly communicate it? Through CRM, you can do it. There's a lot of ways you can do it.
Yeah.
But do the people around me like me?
Yeah.
Do they know that I have their best interest, that I'm really seeing the whole picture? And in salespeople, sometimes they're, unfortunately, in some cases, they're the top performers. They think, my stuff don't stink.
Yeah.
I create big numbers, so like other people's feelings don't matter. Look at the scoreboard, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, ooh, that runway is short when you need help. All of a sudden, you haven't earned any relationship capital with anybody. And I think that also falls in position. So you think client focused, it's all them. I'm like, if you don't have your internal game in order, you're ill-equipped sometimes to effectively run through the whole process.
Yeah. And we talk about this as a flywheel at Advisa, because if you want your top performers, even your middle performers, you want their sales flywheel to be turning easily, right? To be able to move it easily. And so that's the reason they should care about it. Because if you sell something to someone and then what they end up experiencing as this product or service isn't what you positioned it as, the likelihood of them being happy with that, referring you to other people, talking about how great your company is or you as a sales rep is goes down.
Right.
So the reason why reps should care about it is because even after I toss it over the fence, if that experience for my team members is exactly what I framed it as and the client is happy, then it becomes easier for them to open up new opportunities for me then to go in and meet new people. And then guess where you are? Back at open, right? So you get that flywheel spinning, and I think that separates kind of the best from the rest.
When you talk about the flywheel and the best of the rest, it's a good transition to some other pieces of this I want to dive into before I want to go. The next place we're going to go is individually, like behavioral patterns, who can sell, who can't, like what are some misnomers. But you talked about like deal dynamics and the different pieces moving. When we see top performers and even like VPs of sales that like are effective at coaching, because some aren't, going in to know, you can frame all this stuff up right, but if you don't know how a client buys, what have they bought before? Like one of my favorite questions is, hey, like this sounds great, but they seem even eager to start with you. Hey, having the wherewithal to draw back, like, can you talk to me about an enterprise-wide investment that was rolled out over years that stuck and worked?
Yeah.
Well, this, no, just anything.
Yeah.
Anything that was different that everyone in this organization had to adopt and use as part of the cultural language. Yeah. And then when you hear crickets, all of a sudden it's like, do they know what they're saying yes to? And like do they know that what they're paying for? And is the client equipped with the right roles and people to use what you're delivering? And so many people can go so quick, like, oh, they want to start really quick. I'm like, hey, how many times have they false started on things? How many times has this group thought, oh, we're ready to go, but they're not? And as a salesperson, you're thinking like, why would I give them reason not to? I'm like, because you got to think longer term and like, are you really helping them? Sorry, you had something.
Well, yeah, because I don't want the listeners to miss the brilliance of that question, right? Which is typically whenever we do any kind of sales training, we have the best sales reps say, what are some of your best questions? There's usually a common theme. The best questions tap into very directly their experience, their world. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, it sounds simple, but that was the key to that question. You said, in your experiences, when you've rolled out another enterprise level solution over multiple years, how did it work? What went well? That's you being curious, decidedly curious about their experience, not what you've seen happen before.
Right.
And that's, I think that is a huge differentiator between great salespeople and mediocre salespeople. And that's why that little, icon there is not you. And I think that's the thing about most sales processes. They're built around the sales rep. Mm-hmm. That right there to me is a big flaw. That's why I like customer-focused selling. Another way to think of it is like client-centric. So it's like the customer's in the middle, and this is a process that's moving around the customer. And the sales professional's job is just to know where I am and to know how to move it.
Right.
That's it. So anyway, so that's the framework. That's what I like about it.
And I think the bedrock before we transition to something else is, and especially the way that you and I have experienced success when we've really, really experienced success with a client, holistic success with a client, we actually treated them like they're intelligent business people and operators. Yeah. We actually care
Well,
that
they
their
are.
situation changed. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
instead of coming in with some like golden boy or golden girl like approach to, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm going to be this special person.
Yeah.
I actually care what's going on, and I'm not the star of the show.
No.
You're the star of the show, and then I get to use one of my favorite quotes. Everybody's got a plan until you punch them in the mouth.
Yeah.
Which is, I can have the best strategy in the world if it doesn't map to the company's culture and their environment and how they interact, how they train and communicate. I mean, there's so many other ways. No matter what you're selling,
Yeah.
the best thing. I mean, think about. We're about to go into relationships in a second. Think about the best relationships you have. Period. Forget business.
Yeah.
What happens? Oh, they're reciprocal. They listen to me and they seem to care, and I listen to them and they seem to care.
Yeah.
And when I have problems, they just seem to know when to listen and when to. I'm like, huh.
Yeah.
But it's different when you're selling something, right? Yeah. If it is, you're probably not very good at it when you're trying to. And even if you read some of these books, but you don't have self-awareness, I'm going to do that in my next sales meeting. I'm like, you know.
Yeah.
It's good to read. It's good to have all that. But if it's not built in that open trust and credibility, like people know when you're full of it.
Yeah.
People know when you're coming in and it's like you're on your agenda. Just like in a conversation at a bar, if you're hanging out with somebody, you know if they're going to ask you a question or not. Or if they're just going to tell you things. And you're like, well, see ya, buddy.
And the value for a sales leader hearing this is that when you're having a coaching conversation with your sales rep and they're talking about stuff in their world, or they're talking about, hey, here's what I thought I would, and they want to talk about the present part, but then you hit them with a couple questions about, well, before we talk about that, what have you heard them say? If they seem like they can't quickly and very clearly and decisively answer those questions, it means they aren't where they think they are. So I've used, because I grew up in the Saved by the Bell era, right? Where,
Zach Morris,
yeah,
timeout.
Yeah, the timeout, right? If you could pause a sales conversation and go timeout. What's happening right here? Like, where are we? That's kind of what is great about technology. You and I didn't have that kind of technology when we were doing this back then, but a lot of my clients now, especially of our tech clients, they've got these amazing tools where it literally records phone calls, can break them down into chapters, can listen for specific types of questions. I mean, it's amazing. So like you printed off my entire sales call, right, and stapled it as a packet. Now the technology exists for sales coaches to be so much more surgical, to be able to pinpoint and go, yeah, you forecasted this in your pipeline as wherever it is, way further down the pipeline than it really is. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're doing it is because they truly think they're at confirming agreement. And it's like, you're back in open.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because in our approach, and again, I talked about our experience. If you're going to coach talent, you're going to coach a rep, you're going to hire a rep. You're going to advance somebody to a sales leadership position. A lot of what we're talking about comes from a sense of self-awareness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Knowing who you are, knowing how you're wired, knowing how you learn, right? And having a general sense of it. Otherwise, feedback like you just talked about can be people can't take it.
Yeah.
Being, they're always judging me. They're always like, that usually reeks of I don't have prerequisite self-awareness to understand what parts of this are hard for me just naturally when I'm looking left and right. They don't seem to have a problem with it. Maybe they're not wired like you. So at Advisa, we use a tool, and if you hear us talk about PI or predictive index, we're typically referring to the behavioral assessment part of a suite. It is software, disclaimer, that we do sell and we work with clients on. It's primary for us. So we're going to show you some examples of a couple different patterns and how that works. Particularly when you're listening to this, if you have another data point that you use to dive into personality, drives, things that connect to behavior, I think you're going to see some crossover. If you already use PI, you're really going to like the next 10 to 15 minutes. But what I really want to dive into is answering a few questions. One, here's a pattern. Can this person sell?
Oh,
yes or no? Some people just can't sell, right? Okay. And is there a perfect sales pattern? So I'm going to show, Brian and I both are steeped in PI and behavioral consulting. We use this data point and technology when we're coaching, developing sales talent, helping clients hire sales talent. So from a broad perspective, if you're not a client listening to this, you will get something. But if you are a client, you're going to love talking to
So you're going to flash up a profile?
I'm going to put a profile up there. Oh. And I want you to talk to me about this pattern. And what I want you to do is just give me a general oversight, like what's this person wired like? And can they or can't they sell? And if they can, how? And if they can't, why? All right, here we go.
Oh, this is an easy one.
All right.
Yeah, it's an easy one.
All right, let's talk about
I'm
it.
very familiar with this profile.
Okay.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah, so, I'm not going to teach people how to read it, but basically this is a person who is hyper attuned to emotion and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So they pick up very quickly on how someone else is emoting, whether that be, hey, I'm glad I'm on this call. Hey, I'm kind of annoyed. Hey, this is going smoothly. And this person is desperate for connection. They want that connection and they want it to be positive. So I think the positive for this profile in selling is that they're quick to connect. They're quick to figure out how to adapt their approach to get that connection, because that's what they need more than anything, is to be liked and to be connected and to feel in every call and every conversation it's going well, that it's going harmoniously, that it's not, there's no tension. It just feels smooth. And this person has the adaptability to kind of put the pedal down when it's necessary, but also stay in the moment and let things play out in a sequence. And so I think that's another benefit at times to this profile in selling. And then the other characteristic that this is an out of the box, flexible, comfortable in ambiguity, isn't kind of rigid. There's no right way to do it.
Right.
It's kind of, you're never going to hear this person do the same thing twice. So, the downside of this profile in selling, because that's the thing about no matter what profile you put up here and you ask me, can they sell? Well, sure. Selling is a behavior. It's a bunch of behaviors.
Right.
Selling it successfully, getting an actual sale, that's the outcome of it. But so though I kind of hit on the things that are good behaviors about this pattern, I think the challenging part is things don't always go smoothly. And how do you navigate out of that? And how do you keep your mental wherewithal when you get a bunch of no's, which mean I wasn't connected to you.
I don't like you.
Yeah. What happens then?
Right.
So that's a downside to it. I think the other downside to it is because they're so attuned to kind of, hey, what can I say to get you to connect to me? This tends to be a pattern when not self-aware, struggles with that message we talked about earlier about way too much talking and not enough listening. Because they grew up and they were in a world where if I talk, I can connect with you.
Right.
And so that tends to be a lesson to coach immediately too, because these people will usually talk way too much, way more than they should be. Yeah.
Well, this is actually Brian. So, and way to nail that. And when I was working with Brian, sales manager, I think one of the things with this pattern that you saw was once there was awareness of a behavior or skill that you needed to do, what Brian was just immensely adept at was understanding, oh, this is going to cost me energy to do it, but I understand it and I know it has a timeline and I know it's effective. So I have buy-in to the behavior and I can do it over and over and over and over again. And no matter what the profile is, if that person doesn't have the prerequisite awareness, the coaching or the behavior, it doesn't stick. Don't they know? No. Like that's not how they're wired. So recognizing that, I mean, you've done that masterfully over your career.
Oh, thank you. Well, you talked about reps earlier. This profile doesn't like pain, doesn't like anything that feels like tension. And so coaching that person, and I've had to struggle through this, is that when you get lots of no's, knowing how to, the energy wherewithal to keep picking up the phone and keep putting in the reps, because to some degree it's a numbers game.
Right.
And so I had to learn that, and it was de-energizing. That was the de-energizing part of the job. But on the flip side of that, so I had to be self-aware of that. And that was the part of the job you have to adapt to.
Right.
Because people with different profiles, they'll keep coming back to bang on the stone, and it's not painful. Very painful for this profile. Right. So that's the part, the flip side of it though, where I think there's a benefit, is that when I would get on a call and I would very quickly realize that they weren't interested in having an actual sales conversation. They were shopping, whatever. I spent zero time, right? Like it was that instant, we're moving on to the next call.
Right.
And I would watch other peers, they get way more desperate. So they want anybody who'll be on the phone with them. It's like, how can I get this to be a sale? It's like, it's actually better to know when there's not quickly. Right. I'd rather take a fast no than a long maybe.
Right.
And so I think I feel like that was a strength for me. In fact, Leslie on our team, who's a superhero, she supports us like a superhero. she used to sit really close to my desk, and she came in one day and just randomly was like, you know what I've realized about your phone calls? She's like, you get to like is this really going to move to a next call or not? Like really fast. I'm like, I guess that's just because that's what I want to know. Right. So I want to connect with them, but I also don't want anybody to think that like, we're just going to keep talking because that's the part of this job I like.
Yeah.
No, I like it if it's going somewhere.
Correct.
Right. So if it's not, let's just save each other the pain.
100%.
So.
All right. We're going to go to another one. I'm going to talk about this one.
Why don't you let me talk about this one?
No, we can both. We can both contribute. So let me tell you about this person. All right. So looks a little different, right? So even if you don't even understand what these graphs mean, it's no big deal. This is a person that thrives off of, if Brian's pattern was about comfort, this one's about, welcoming pain. And it's almost validating, where it's like, if there's not enough of it, the challenge, it doesn't merit them. It's like, there's got to be something better to do. And that's where disinterest lies. You also get a sense of need for connection. It kind of rests in there, but there's a need for connection. So when you're going out, you have this pattern is looking for wins, looking for problems to solve and to try to be useful and to do it through people and to do it with people and connect with people if possible. Also, it's much more driving. So less attention span, harder to sit still. So it could be positive in the fact that there's a positive response to pressure, deadlines, quotas, results, client-driven or otherwise, which can be more difficult when a client's talking and I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Okay, focus on this. Your body's rejecting the focus because I'm ready to say something new, change gears. Also, more flexible, so comfortable with risk. So when you talked before about, hey, making a bunch of calls, most of the stuff isn't going to hit. All right. Yeah. You're going to do it right, and you're not going to get rewarded. Yeah, okay, sounds like life. It's unfair. Yeah. But it's rigged, and you can win it. So that's fine, and I'm going to try to win it. So, but it's a profile when you think about going back to effectiveness in selling. A lot of the traditional field sales, you're going to see a lot of profiles like this.
Oh yeah.
Where this person wants to go there because there's a sense of individual ownership.
Yeah.
They can run their schedule. They have to go out and win. It's almost a competitive field. And there's not necessarily a proven way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because in sales, this is why it's for some people and it's not for some people, not from a pattern related, but it can be. But you can do everything right and still lose all the time.
Yeah.
And you can be lazy and not do everything right. And if you stumble upon something, you can win and get rewarded for it. So folks that think, well, I just want to go somewhere and do it right. It's a tough field to tolerate it. And then on the negative side, for some, there's a lot of positive, thinking big picture, making things happen, solving problems, listening, going out there. Yeah. On the negative side, this is much more likes to tell than to listen.
Yeah.
Much more likes to dive in and dictate the experience rather than entering the experience with a prospect or a client when they go in, and sometimes can't shut up. Hello. And this is me. So I don't know what if I missed any high points that.
Yeah. If you are like a challenger sales, I like that book a lot. I think it's a solid book. This is more of the challenger sales profile, and my pattern is more of the relationship builder profile. So both have positives, right? But it's how do you get self-awareness about when the positives are positive and when the negatives are negative. And then that's where you spend your time coaching, is on the stuff that can be negative if you're not self-aware of it, so that you can drive mindfulness. And I think the mindfulness is the piece that I never had until I got to Advisa, because that mindfulness piece is more about being, so self-aware is one thing, but being mindful is like in the moment, being able to create space between the thought or the conversation that's happening and what you're thinking about. And that is, I think, the best reps that I see, the highest performers, they have both self-awareness and the ability to bring mindfulness in pressure. So that to me is a big difference. You mentioned earlier about when the challenge, like this profile down here, your pattern, that challenge. If I challenge you until you can't do it, it's like a stick. Well, now I want to go prove it to you. If someone says, well, you can't do it to my profile, my pattern is like, something must be wrong between us because it seems mean. Right. So then it's immediately like, I want to try to change your mind that I can do it, not because I like that challenge, but because I want you to be positive.
I need you to have my back, please.
Right.
Please have my back. Yeah.
So and then that leads to different coaching, right? I mean, your coaching style to me was exactly what I needed to be a high performing rep, which was when you would look over and see that I was bludgeoned and that I wasn't wanting to jump back in the ring, you would come back and be like, who cares what these people think? Right? You're the best. And you'd build me back up. And it was just that it was meeting my need of reminding me that you were a person that mattered to me. And so you doubling down on, you still thought I was awesome even when I was in a rut or a sales slump, that would carry me out of the sales slump.
Right.
And I think that that's different between these two profiles, because if I come and do that to you and you haven't had the wins and your result is showing that you're not winning, it doesn't have the same effect if I come over and just tell you how great you are.
Yeah. You're wasting my time.
Yeah. It's kind of like, well, if I was so great, my numbers would be different.
Exactly.
And so it's a different coaching. I need to figure out how to give you a challenge where I know you're going to win, and then just point out, see, look, these are all the little wins that lead to the big wins.
Yeah. And I think that I have which one can effectively sell, and we'll have fun with that in just a second, is if you look at these graphs, like if one thing doesn't jump out to you, they are very, very different. But if you think about the results that Brian's has from his different roles and archetypes he's played in sales, he's seen nothing but success. If you look at mine over the course of my career, I've really seen nothing but success from that. And if you think about like, well, is there a pattern? Which one should we look for? Which one can sell? I mean, we're kind of debunking to a certain degree, like, well, Brian obviously can't produce that behavior, and BJ obviously can't slow down and listen and care for. That's not the case. There's other things going on. And then you would say, well, why would you look at this? Then why care? Because of what you just said.
Yeah.
The path to success for Brian and the path to success for me did not require the same coaches and experience.
Yeah.
And if you tried to do that, you would be one of those managers. Some people make it with me, some people don't.
Yeah.
I bet they look a lot like you if they make it, or a lot different. It's just one or the other.
Yeah.
And you're leaving like basically latent talent just on the table. And you think, well, they're just not performing. Well, have you thought that maybe you're just not a good coach? Have you thought maybe that you haven't really thought about their situation, what they might need to fill these gaps?
Yeah.
Well, they just can't do it. Time out, Zach Morris again. Maybe. How do you know that?
Yeah.
You know, have you taken any kind of evaluation that's objective and empirical and tested milestones to see, is there progress moving when that happens? So I like that you pointed out the differences about what people need. An interesting thing with this pattern, which I see a lot when you see it in sales, like, I don't understand why they're not performing. Well, because you're not leaving them alone.
Yeah.
And I know that one thing, while you were managing me, if I was going through a rut or a struggle, the best thing to do was to leave me alone. But as a manager, especially Brian, who cares about me, the first thing I better go just see what's going on with BJ. And he probably multiple times has stopped on the phone and be like, I'm going to wait until he actually sells something. I'm going to wait until there's a turn, and then I'm going to check in, because anything else would make, if this profile feels useless or weak, and you come in and validate that, hey, you need help. It's just like literally the self-confidence goes even deeper. It's like, yeah, apparently I need some help. Like, well, you come to a call, tell me what to do. Yeah. It's just like, well, that's not what I want. This person should, they should be doing this. Yeah. So you might even see behavior out of either one of these. You're like, that doesn't make sense when it happens. So I guess the point we're getting to, again, this we'll depart from the data here in just a second, but is which one can effectively sell? The answer is they both can, or they both can't. And I think another underlying feature, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this too, is, and we talked about it before we started today, Brian's pattern is different than a lot of other patterns. And Jim, one of our contemporaries, Jim Hislop, is also similar to Brian's pattern. And he's also amazing at this. And you look at like, well, why would you ever bring those two? I'm like, well, yeah, they're the two best people I've ever seen do this. Well, they look very different than you. Well, so they do it like you. No, I actually just try to do it like they do because it works better. And what they have is they have an end or an outcome that they're committed to bring in these behavior changes when necessary over a period of time. And they have both self-awareness. I understand I'm wired. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a weakness. It just is.
Yeah.
And there's a definitive set of behaviors that I can learn through practice, through repetition, through all of these other things so that they don't bring down my strengths. And then I get them enough to be able to be successful because the goal matters. As much as Brian shares that I don't really like pain, I don't really like pain. If you see him when he's amidst conflict, you see pain. Like Brian's getting through like, okay, here it's here now. But what you don't see is retreat. I've never seen you retreat and being like, okay, what do I do? There's a sense of quiet and calm confidence that you bring to the table that you have built up over the years, and it keeps getting better.
Yeah.
So to say any one of these patterns, well, they can't do it lump sum. I think that there's questions that you might have left on the table before you do that, because there are some patterns that you look at and be like, yeah, you don't typically see this in selling. What else do you know about this person? What do they want?
Yeah.
Hey, are they coachable? How do you know? Like, there's these questions you want to unpack. So I don't know if you have any more comments on that, Brian.
No, I think you touched on most of it. That the C drive here about patience, I think, has a lot to do with it. And I think people get confused because there are some paradoxes in selling that the environment we usually create as sales VPs are quotas, right? We got this goal. It's an annual goal or it's a quarterly goal. And then then the number breaks down into your reps and you end up getting a quota. Well, by inherently what you just did was you created, you gave a number to a person that they had no input on, right? And you gave them a time frame to go get it. Mm-hmm. So now you've put time pressure on them. That doesn't always go well for people with my profile, right? That's the part that it's like you can really create a bad environment because of the nature of the way sales works. I'm not suggesting you change that. I'm just saying as a sales leader, you need to be aware that your reps are going to react and respond to that very, very differently. Mm-hmm. Coaching a whole group of people like yourself, you almost have to have that, because if you don't, it's like there has to be an end point to the game. Otherwise, the impatience, the squirrel syndrome will just, you'll bounce around, right, from thing to thing. So having that little bit of pressure is good. But the reality of selling, I believe, is that there are elements of it that are very high patience.
100%.
You got to put them in an order. You got to do it over and over again. And those are the parts that maybe someone with your profile, a more impatient, results-oriented person, they struggle with, because like, and you mentioned it earlier when you said, I've seen this problem 9 times, so I'm just going to tell them how to fix it.
Yeah.
Usually not going to get a wrong answer, right?
Answer.
Whereas I think what's an advantage of a more high patient person is as soon as I see that this problem is similar to multiple other times that I've sold it successfully, it gets me excited, but I'm going to let them discover it. Like we're going to get on the path together, and I'm going to walk them down. And when they see it, when they see that, oh my gosh, I think your product or service can solve my problem, it's like, I love that moment. That's my favorite part of selling, when they're like, I think, yeah, I see how I see now how your product or service can help me solve my problem. And it's like their epiphany. That's a beautiful thing, because then it's like, hey, it's your epiphany.
Well, yeah.
And all I did was shepherd the path to it, knowing that every time I get someone to that point, they buy.
And that's something I've learned from you and from Jim. And it's one of my quick bits. And this, if you're listening to this and you're a VP of sales or a sales coach, that I go back to all the time. Hey, what's the shortcut? Train that person in the opposite style of behavior.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly thinking, what would someone more patient do?
Yeah.
Yeah. What would someone who actually likes harmony and wants to listen do?
Yeah.
And not that I don't love my client. It's just that I'm fighting natural urges I'm deferring to solving a problem, which is not, there's a stage for that. I'm typically not in it. When my body's like, okay, let's go. Yeah. You know the problem. Calm down. And by the way, in your marriage, how does that work? When you just try to fix everything, how's that go, by the way? If anybody listening, if you're wired like me, not good. Yeah. Not good. What do you want? Can you just listen to me? Can you just listen to me? It's a human thing. And going in there to be human, well, I'm just going to be authentic. And this bothers me. It probably bothers you to hear. I just want to be myself. I just want to be authentic when I get there. I like to do a lot of formalities. I've seen most reps that have said that walk me through the crappiest, most inhuman calls I've ever been on.
Yeah, they're just not listening.
They're just disoriented. Yeah. It's like, they're my pal. They're my buddy. I'm going to bring over some donuts. I'm like,
you're not having a sales conversation.
That's one way to do it. Well, I'm the top performer, and that's where I talk about territory blindness. What do you do? Well, I sell oil. Where? Texas. When I go to New Jersey, I find the person well, they're actually good at this. Why don't you just take the New Jersey person, throw them in Texas, and just split the territory in half, and then just watch. Mm-hmm. Well, no, we don't want to mess with, Sandy or Dave. They do great. I'm like, no, I watched. It won't be very hard to replace them at all.
Yeah.
Like, why? They're not effectively managing, they're not effectively doing these things. So I'm going to pause here. I want to transition to something because there are some themes and questions that I know you and I confront a while. So I want to go to the coach's corner with Brian and BJ. So there's one now. This is timely. We're probably about like 10 minutes to go, so we can kind of run through a few of these.
Yeah.
And I want to just get your take, react to these, and let's just try to provide something that might be useful to those listening. So I want to read this. Since COVID-19, there is no way to move a sale forward.
Yeah, it's a cop-out.
All right.
It's a total cop-out. There are always hard times. And that's the thing, is that when there's a hard time, like a pandemic,
right?
Even since this happened at Advisa, we've brought on new clients. So
you're the manager. You're looking at those.
Yeah,
I know mine.
I mean, it's a handful. It's not as voluminous as it normally is, definitely. But no, it's there. People have more pain right now in different areas. So if you treat your job like, I'm going to go out and tell people what we can do to solve their problem, yeah, it's going to be hard to sell in this environment.
Right.
But if you are looking at sales as, I'm going to go find out what brings you pain and see if I can help you lessen that pain or solve that pain, there's a lot of pain out there right now. So for those that you are saying something like this is a total cop-out answer, it's just a matter of go find the prospects that you have the pain that your product or service solves during this time. The other thing I would love to touch on, this is something we train in CFS, is the difference between a condition versus an objection, right? I have no money. We're going out of business.
Condition.
Yeah, hang up the phone, show empathy, do that, but get off the phone, right? Because that's trying to treat that like an objection to your product means you're not listening.
Correct.
You're not mindful. So yeah, there are a lot of conditions right now for a lot of businesses, but that doesn't mean there are no opportunities out there. And I think the most resilient sales reps are those that are going to immediately go, this is the time to shift both the message that I bring to marry up with the pain I'm seeing. And I'm going to go find the types of businesses who are thriving and flourishing. There are whole groups of types of businesses that flourish during recessions. And so, it is what it is. And this is a health pandemic. One more thing about this. This is a health crisis. A health crisis that impacts people. So when people have pain, it changes the way they do their work. It changes everything. This that we're living through right now is a once in a lifetime event. It's going to change everything.
We hope.
But for every sales door it's closing, I think it's opening other ones.
Right.
It's just a matter of what are going to be the companies and the reps that go find the doors that are opening when the ones that they had in their pipeline are closing.
And one thing that I'd add is just an individual contributor in my hat on as a consultant for Advisa. And one thing that I did individually, if you're listening to this, you're like, well, what should I do though? Personally, is go out and be who you say you are. Go listen and go to the places to what you just shared, Brian, where the pain exists, and just deliver.
Yeah.
Like show at this time, like, hey, I actually care about you. I want to listen and I want to do things for you. You can call it free. You can call it included. You can call it added value, but go in and say, hey, I understand this situation. I'm hurting too.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go give. And if you're the one who doesn't leave any value on the table and you just take, you might be right. There might not be much for you because all you did was take, versus how often have you gone the extra mile? And by the way, if you're listening and you haven't, now's a great time to start to do that, to win that back.
I agree. That's the other thing about you. You have, as a sales professional, you have to be aware and not sound tone deaf to the situation. And so and depending on what you sell and what industry you're calling into, do your research.
Yeah.
Know what you're calling into, because when I say it's a cop-out answer, I don't mean that carte blanche. There are businesses out there right now that are decimated and there are no sales in those industries. What I'm saying is, if you sell something that isn't industry specific or isn't only targeted to one demographic that happens to be hurting really badly right now, then you have to think creatively.
Right.
But I mean, every business article you read, when huge downturns happen, innovation goes up like 100%. Crazy. And those people that are innovating are the ones that are figuring out how to go solve the pain.
Right.
And they're selling things. So.
All right. Well, let's dive into something more particular.
Okay.
Everyone always pushes for a price before I'm able to even start the process in a sales conversation.
Yeah.
So I just have to give them the price, right? That's the right thing to do because it's customer focused. They ask for it, I give it to them.
Yeah, if you want to end the call really quickly. I think this is a balance. I've had reps that will try to do the evade right? Like I'm not even going to answer your question. And that's annoying. Right. So I think my personal opinion to this question is to give a price, but then to flip it to a question.
100%.
Yeah. So if you're already asking about pricing, range, and I usually do it as ranges. If people ask me for a price and I don't even know anything about it, I give them a range. Yeah, it's somewhere between 5,000 and 150,000. But given that you're already asking about price, you must be awfully far down this process of consideration. What else are you looking at? Because now now I'm in their world, right? So the key is to take that question, answer it, don't be annoying, but get to them talking as fast as possible.
Right.
The reps that get all undone by this, if you listen to their calls, they keep talking.
Right.
It's like,
well, and the thing I'd add to that too, in our process, I'm sure in other sales processes, if you've effectively timed your verbal agenda, hey, here's what we're going to do today, and I frame the call, it decreases the likelihood you're going to run into this.
Yeah.
If you get this early, odds are you meandered, and someone's you didn't build the confidence in them, and you didn't have that awareness or mindfulness to like, all right, here's where I got to click in and be the professional. My job is to facilitate this meeting. Yeah. And by the way, still happens to me when I'm in a game, I'm like, this is going really well. We're talking about things. And then it just falls out of the buckets. That was the promise. I didn't make the promise. We didn't agree on the promise. So where's it going?
Yeah.
I don't know where it's
on
going.
the flip side of it though, I had a sales rep at one of my client companies that they've just gone through customer focused selling. Person delivered a brilliant verbal agenda, took control of the meeting. And at the end of the verbal agenda, it's like, hey, do you have any questions before I jump in? Is there anything you want to add to the agenda? The person on the customer said, yeah, I just need to know how much this is. I've been all over your website. I've done all the online demos. Like I'm ready to move. I just need to know what's the cost. And because this person was undone and so rigid to the process, they stopped listening. Right. So it was like, no, that's a different type of person, right? That's a different prospect. Some prospects are just price shopping,
right? And
it's annoying. And you have to handle that, like I just said, accept it and give it back as a question so you can learn and get curious again about their world. But this person was saying something different. Give me the price because that's all I have left before I move forward. And this person just kept talking. And I was like, my advice is if someone's ready to move forward,
right.
move forward.
Right, 100%.
So
let's do a couple more before we wrap up.
Yep.
This is one that you hopefully you're hearing. You might even be thinking about now. How can I tell if my top individual performers can produce even more?
I think based upon the equation of the equation you and I talk about a lot with selling, which is if they're already getting the result, then you can go back and take the pieces of the sales equation. Like how long is it taking you to get those deals?
Right.
How much pain and effort is going into it? What's the average close value? Because if you can get your high performers who are producing really well, but they're doing it in an inefficient way that drains their energy, then they can produce more. My more means they can do it with less pain, greater amounts of positive energy into the process. And that's going to actually lift it even more, in my opinion. But how can you tell? I think you talk to them and you find out where those gaps are. I think that's the other thing I would just suggest is that I get frustrated when I hear sales VPs are talking about their high performance as if they don't have any room to grow.
Yep.
I'm like, I have not yet met a rep, including myself, who doesn't have ridiculous amounts of places where they could get better.
Right.
So it's a matter. So good coaches find that.
Or they fear them.
Yeah.
The managers fear their top performer. Well, if they ever left, I'm like, usually you observe those people. I'm like, yeah, they're actually more placeable than you think. You know what I mean? Because like I'm watching what they're doing. They're not learning, they're telling, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And you get that. And I mean, and the other piece that you covered is you talked about energy. Sometimes pushing individual top performers to constantly do more. Hey, I know, Brian, no one else has hit their number this quarter. So if you can just kind of bring in a few more deals, it'd be great. And it doesn't do them any benefit to make that happen.
Yeah.
It's you could wear out somebody and push them out of your business. It's managing the energy. And if you want to see more enterprise deals, how are you training and developing that person to better manage those and actually move away from a lot of the volume activity that's lower value from an average close value into higher value? That means bigger deals, probably a little longer sales cycles.
Yep.
But if you look at it in course of a year or multiple quarters, you probably see them thrive more because there's less stuff.
Right.
There's less stuff in the way versus, oh yeah, I have 100 accounts. How do you manage all those relationships? Yeah. I don't care what you're doing. That's very difficult to do.
Well, even if I just look at you as one of our top performers at our company, I mean, you hit a major milestone last year. And so to look at that and go, oh, no one's ever done that before. your top performer, I look at it and go, okay, that's now going to be old news. As soon as this becomes old news, because now someone did it. So now what's the next threshold that we're going to look at? And that's motivating.
Yep.
So I would just keep challenging, because I think every top performer has room to grow.
Yeah. And they should want to, by the way.
Yeah.
Couple more, and then we're going to wrap up. All right. This is a good one. I'd love to hear your perspective, particularly on this one, Brian. Where should I spend my time and focus as a sales manager for maximum sustainable results? I know it's broad.
Yeah, that's broad. I think what you shouldn't do, let's start where you shouldn't. I don't think a sales manager, and this happens way too often, you spend your maximum amount of time on the people who are performing the worst, because you think that I don't want it to look bad that I have people on my team performing this poorly. And that's the wrong place to spend your time. So for me, it is removing obstacles for the best of the best. If you're spending no time removing obstacles for your top performers, I think you need to reevaluate. But it's the folks in the middle that aren't clearly the bottom or aren't clearly the top. I think that's where you have the maximum amount of growth potential to happen. And what you just have to make sure you still have balance, right? So again, not a carte blanche answer, but I'm not saying don't ever coach your bottom performers, because you could have some amazing folks there that just don't have the skills yet. So that would be, and then the other piece of my answer to this is find out if it's a skill gap or a will gap, because if it's a skill gap, we can work on closing that. If it's a will gap, then
that's hard.
Yeah, you can keep pounding sand down that rat hole for way too long.
I love pounding sand down rat holes. That's one of my favorite favorite lines. The only thing I'd add to that too is, if you're the sales manager, look inwardly at yourself. Yeah. How much self-awareness do you have? Emotional intelligence? Do you know where your strengths lie and where they don't lie? Because sometimes where you should spend your time is developing areas that makes you a more effective coach and mentor to a broader set of people, versus one or two styles of people work for me. Well, there's 20 styles.
Yeah.
What would happen if you were able to more effectively spend your time in developing other people versus managers? And I find this most with managers who carry a number.
Yeah.
They carry a big number, and when push comes to shove and it gets to crunch time, what are you going to focus on? What I can do with my own two hands, and then the reps kind of get pushed to the side, and it's just sink or swim. And there's a lot of clients that we work with that they get by doing that, but if you look at the morale levels of a team and the sustainability, it's not a fun place to work.
Well, in that question, maximum and sustainable for the company, for the VP of sales, or for the rep, right? Like, I think that question can be applied at all three of those levels, and it would change slightly my answer of where you should go spend your time.
All right. So I had a few more, but I know we're right up against the top of the hour. So if you're listening to this and you got value out of it, please send us a note on, if you're on the Advisor site, checking this out. There's a little Drift app that comes up on the bottom. Leslie, who Brian talked to, these messages go right to her. Just ask a question. Either one of us would be happy to talk to you when this comes through. And if you like this, also let us know. I mean, this isn't costing anything to anybody listening to this or for our clients. If you saw value, or even more productively, if you saw questions that, man, I'd love to hear you talk about X, Y, Z. That'd be great, that we can fill this screen with things that are very, very particular to your situation, try to handle them, and provide you maybe not direct answers, but maybe some more useful questions to kind of break down what's happening with your specific team, with you as an individual, and roll from there. So, Brian, thanks for making
thanks for
up.
having me.
Yeah, we'll have a round two soon.
It's been fun.
All right. Take care.